Yeah, so I hit a really low point in um, a couple of years prior. My wife and I lost two pregnancies in really awful ways that I wouldn't wish on anybody. All that emotional trauma, just I was at the time somebody who kept those feelings in. That started to build up. In a way, when you engage your zone of fulfillment, you understand that you shift from seeing and navigating the chaos and all the craziness of your day from a 2D perspective into a 3D perspective. And just as somebody who hasn't yet seen that 3D image is going to go,
Hi, David. Welcome to the show.
hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Welcome to Peak Performance Perspective, where we help entrepreneurs master health, wealth, and relationships. Now, as an international speaker, an author, and an executive coach, I must ask you, what does peak performance mean to you?
That's a great question. The short answer is I would say it means you're maximally aligned in the moment. The little more drawn out answer is that so often peak performance is focused on output. And I can list off countless examples of people who have achieved and output in all kinds of ways that actually lead to a very, what's the word, Ponzi scheme-esque creative accounting way of saying, okay, cool, this is success over here, but all this sort of collateral damage over here, we're not going to take into account. To me, it's really about aligning, and everything that I'm about is helping people align with what I call their zone of fulfillment, which I'm happy to get into, but it's really this sweet spot that we each have in any moment to where we can be maximally fulfilled and have the greatest impact. And so to me, peak performance is about engaging in that state as much as possible.
That's very interesting because most people associate performance with output and outcome. So I'm sure we'll touch the zone of fulfillment alignment there in a second. But before we start there, let me ask you this question. There was a turning point in your life where you realized the contradictions in high performance and how it goes with well-being practices. Tell me a little bit about what made you realize that and what was the outcome of the realization.
Yeah, so I hit a really low point in um, a couple of years prior. My wife and I lost two pregnancies in really awful ways that I wouldn't wish on anybody. All that emotional trauma, just I was at the time somebody who kept those feelings in. That started to build up. I was working on a side hustle, an entrepreneurial venture, in addition to working in the tech field as a leader in tech in a startup environment. So I was very accustomed to going after your dreams, trying to make stuff happening and really having to work hard. But this side hustle was about to fail. My marriage was in a rough spot. Like all these things were just life was saying, guess what? You are in for an upgrade is really what I call it now. And what I was struggling with was the fact that I was an open book. I didn't hide the fact that I was in a rough spot on all these levels. I didn't let my shame overcome me. I wasn't undisciplined in any shape, way, or form, and I wasn't extrinsically motivated. In other words, I was doing all the things everybody was saying are good and should help you find your way. And in fact, the harder I applied the soundbite wisdoms and the best-selling books, the advice in these books that I was reading, the more I started to notice that there were these major contradictions that I was banging into and no one was talking about. And the first one was just the literal that I had no energy left mentally, physically, emotionally, spirit, whatever word you want to, I was spent. And every bit of advice out there was telling me to use time I didn't have with energy that didn't exist to try to foster some new habit that might take weeks, if not longer, to actually yield some results when I needed them yesterday. And I love to take user behavior, it's my background in tech and user experience, and put it in a different context to evaluate, is it really a worthwhile pattern to pursue? And if you take that, all those dynamics and put it in a different, slightly different context, suddenly you go, wait a second, that makes no sense. And the example I like to give is imagine you're pulled over on the side of the road. You've got no gas in your tank. There's steam coming out of your engine. The AAA car tech repair person comes up and pulls up right next to you and says, don't worry, you're in good hands. I'm here to help. And you're like, awesome, great, thank goodness. And then the next thing the person says is, I just need you to drive another 20 miles up the road and then we'll take good care of you. And you look at them like you're missing something here. And that's the state I was in. And I was like, am I crazy? I don't think I'm crazy here. And that started me on this path of starting to, first of all, try to solve that. I call it a paradox, a critical life paradox. But that led me to start researching and talking to different leaders and high performers all around the world just to get advice. And I started to see everybody struggling with these contradictions. And it became something that turned into much more than just trying to get advice from myself. I have a book coming out early next year that is literally 5 years of research in terms of interviewing people and about 8 years of research in terms of exploring all these different bodies of wisdom to try to make sense of these crazy contradictions that touch upon peak performance, being, and even purpose, meaning living a good life.
You are very vocal about these contradictions in modern self help wisdom. What do you think makes these contradictions so prevalent? Why are they not discussed openly? And why do people fall for them?
That's a great question. No one's actually ever asked me that. Why they're all prevalent is I believe that we have overly simplified life. I think in some ways we have made life very one-dimensional. It's okay, cool. I put this input in, I get this output. And so the depth, if you will, I'm not out to point fingers at things that people often complain about, like social media and stuff, but in a way, it's if you look at the depth of conversations you have and the way in which you engage most things, ask yourself, are you really engaging it on a deep level? Are you fully showing up? Are you fully present? Are you willing to be in the messiness that is normal life? Or is it, I just want the quick, streamline, give me the thing so I can move on to the next thing. And as a result, when things get messy, we tend to just gravitate to, give me this thing that sounds really good and sounds really simple, and let me apply it, even if it actually leads to dynamics like I just described. And because of the fact that we are also in peak performance in particular, we're told, okay, build motivation and momentum, really focus on just a tiny step, the first step, or what is it? What is the quote? Something like the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. It's really true. You do have to start. However, there's an end to that, which is the journey to walking around in circles also starts with the first step, right? And so at the end of the day, there's more to it than just a single dimension. And in reality, we've compartmentalized our life in terms of going, okay, cool. Now I'm focused on work-life balance. Now I'm focused on relationships. Now I'm focused on health. And we can check it off and measure it. But all of these aspects influence one another, just as we have a circulatory blood system in our body, we have organs, we have skin, we have thoughts, we have emotions, and they all influence one another. And so when we lose that holistic nature and that willingness to go, okay, cool, there's more to it than just this simple thing, we miss out on a lot. And it requires, I think, a lot of times getting to a point where you apply these things. A lot of the clients and leaders that I work with get to a point where they're like, I'm really smart. I have a track record of success in these different areas, and I don't understand why my life is the way it is. And it's because of these contradictions.
Let's understand what the zone of fulfillment is. And can you give us an example of how someone can identify it and then align with it?
Yeah. So the short answer is, if I were to ask you, what is it that you really want? Right? What is it that why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you doing this podcast? Why are you working in the career you're working on? Why are you pursuing this relationship that you're in or investing in it and so forth? And everyone will give their answer, whatever it is. If I were to ask you why again and why again, it might be like, okay, I'm working hard in this job so I can make a good living, so I can provide for my family. And I keep asking why. And it's because I want to be able to make sure they're okay. Okay, why did that? If you keep asking why and why again, you're eventually going to get to a point where you're going to say, so I can ultimately feel free. So I can feel like, okay, cool, I've taken care of everything I need to. Everybody I love's okay. And now I have space and I'm free. And when you ask why to that, then the next thing that everybody will inevitably say, and I've done this with a lot of people, is now I can fully be alive. And in a way that sounds really, what's the word? It can sound a little cheesy because day-to-day life seems anything but that. But at the end of the day, when you start to go, why is it that you look at champions and incredible performers? And I call it the Tom Brady effect because I respect him as a football player. But I look at it and go, Tom Brady is somebody who won, what was it? How many championships? 8, something like insane number of Lombardi trophies, right? And in doing so, in winning all those championship rings, he destroyed the one ring that most researchers will say actually has the biggest influence on your well-being, your life. And probably when he looks back on his life, he's going to say, okay, cool, those trophies were really great. But man, I can't believe my marriage completely suffered because of that. And so in a certain way, when it comes to fulfillment, I start by, or the zone of fulfillment, what I invite everybody to consider is what I mean by fulfillment is not what most people think, because most people think fulfillment is accomplishment. I'm going to go out there, bust my butt, achieve this goal, and then something's going to happen, whatever it is. But the thing is that what we're all chasing is a state of being, whatever it is. Reassurance, I'm finally enough, I can feel comfortable in my own skin, I'll finally feel connection, whatever it is. And the thing is that's actually a state of being, if you look at it day in and day out, one where most of the time we're really constricted. And you work I don't know what term to use, but you work on your body, right? I don't know if it's bodybuilder. Is that the term nowadays? I don't know if that's whatever. Okay, so you're a bodybuilder, right? You know that it's if you sit there and you try to lift with this tight, constricted form, you're going to hurt yourself, right? That doesn't mean that you don't exert yourself, but there's a big difference between I'm going to force it and make it happen versus When are you actually, when's your body at your best? Are you tight and constricted? Or are you light and loose and expansive in a way, right? And so when it comes to your zone of fulfillment, your zone of fulfillment is this way of engaging this moment in that expansive state. And the problem is that we've been taught and sold a story that says, I can't be expansive right now because of the fact that I'm really exhausted. My marriage is on the rocks because I'm in this toxic work situation or whatever else. And on top of that, we also normalize a day-to-day state of being that's very, what's the word? Unfulfilling. That's probably the best word to use. And what I found is actually fulfillment isn't this the payoff. It is not about accomplishment. It's a state of being. And if you look at most high performers, what ends up happening is when they get to that state where oftentimes they are performing well, they're aligning in a certain way with certain factors, which I'll explain in just a second, that these three spheres come into alignment in this magical way. And it creates a state of being that can lead to a lot of output, but it leads to a state in which they're at their best and the people around them are also lifted in the process, where the collateral damage that we're accustomed to success is no longer an issue and the ripple effects are really positive. So what are these three spheres? There's three spheres that make up your zone of fulfillment. The first sphere is your vitality. This is your energy. It's everything that's alive inside of you in this moment. Energy, emotions, thoughts, unconscious habits, a lot that goes into what you're alive with. And a lot of times we're not even aware of half the things that are there because we're so conditioned to not pay attention to that. All of that's weighing on you. And most people are like, I need to find more energy. And that means I have to go and wait again until I get out of this meeting, or I can go to the gym or whatever else. And the thing is that there are ways in which you can tap into the vitality that's in you that comes out of you naturally when you do those things you think you have to do, right? So you think, okay, let me go on vacation and then I'll finally recharge. And it's like, you can do it on vacation. You can bring that to you in this moment. And we can talk about ways in which you actually align with that. The second sphere is your mirror, I call it. So the first one's your vitality. The second one's your mirror. All of my research has led me to understand that science and ancient wisdom actually say the same thing, that life is constantly mirroring our inner state back to us. And that can sound like, oh, come on, that's out there. But I can just ask you a very simple question. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where you're telling somebody something like, will you stop being so loud or intense or whatever, only to find yourself either in that moment or later, soon after, being really loud, really intense, or really whatever? Or you get really pissed at somebody on the phone because they're so impatient and rude, and then without even realizing it later, you're talking to a colleague the exact same way. Or you suddenly start looking for, I like to use the example of my wife. She was looking to suddenly buy a Mini Cooper. And next thing, Mini Coopers are everywhere. Do these cars suddenly appear? No, they've been there. My point is that there's a mirror effect going on in the dynamics around us. And if we can begin to understand that, suddenly the things that we think we have to just barrel through, force our way through, fight through, or just get through, actually are really incredible information to help us connect to our vitality so we can unlock energy and ultimately move into the third sphere. And the third sphere is something that I call your medicine. And this is a term that's very commonly described in indigenous cultures that speak of how we show up with something in this world that's very special and very innate. And we're here to express that. We're here to embody that. It's an innate way of seeing, feeling, thinking, and engaging the world around you. And now most of us think of our medicine or the idea of it as, well, are those our values? Are those our passions? Or is that my genius? And in a way, all of those things arise from your medicine. But your medicine is an essence that you've always had, and chances are very good you've had that conditioned out of you, and you only know how to be successful in spite of that. And so in a way, most of us have very little relationship to our medicine. But if you've ever had a moment, and I'm sure, Mark, you have, knowing a little bit about your background and knowing what you've achieved in your life, have you ever had one of those moments where you just feel this like hell yeah moment where you're doing just the right thing in just the right context, and it creates this impact that you just feel you were made for, and you get this like chill come through you? Have you had a moment like that? That's aligning with your medicine. Things that happens most of the time just randomly in a fluke experience, and we don't really understand it, but there's actually a way to align with that and build deeper relationship to it. And if you think of those three spheres as a Venn diagram, suddenly now at the center of that is this sweet spot that's unique to you. It's unique to what's happening in your life in this moment. And instead of you having to say, wait, let me just get through this, whatever this is, a meeting, an awful boss, a dynamic, a conversation, this awful hardship that's just come my way, every moment moment offers you an opportunity to connect to what's alive in you, your vitality, to tune into what life is mirroring back to you, and to ultimately share and align more with your medicine as you move through that moment. And when you do that, now fulfillment, you shift from fulfillment being about accomplishing something to being in a state of being. It's really hard to put into words, but we've all felt it in those examples that I was just sharing with you. Does that make sense?
Entrepreneurs are definitely one of those people who are looking to find ways to recharge, because an average entrepreneur is a dad or a mom with kids. Beginning entrepreneurs have a full-time job and they're trying to start business. Let's go back to how they could bring that vacation to their regular life so that they can truly be recharged without having to just go away on an expensive trip thinking they would come back recharged, and they're not.
The first thing I say to that is actually how many of you or your listeners have gone on a really expensive trip, and the first half, at least, if not longer, you're actually really restless. And it's not recharging at all. In fact, it's actually really unpleasant. And so we spend a lot of money trying to chase these states of being. And then by the time we eventually snap out of the inertia of how we've been, suddenly the end of our vacation's in sight. And now we've got, wait a second, what's waiting for us back at the office? And so I have clients who go on vacation, spend thousands and thousands of dollars, and end up going, I wish I didn't even go on vacation. So when it comes to recharging, one of the things that is really simple is the first question I ask is, are you just trying to get energy? If you're just trying to get energy and feel an energized state, you can simply just shift your physiology. You can literally just, I mean, this is not going to sound satisfying to a lot of people because we overcomplicate our problems and think, oh my God, it has to be this big thing. But I'm a big fan of some of the work of Tony Robbins, who's all about state management and physiology and literally just moving your body, shifting it, listening to some music, getting your heartbeat going in such a way where you are, what's the word? You're getting the different aspects of your physiology flowing can give you more energy. Now, a lot of times you'll be like, okay, fine, but then I still have this draining thing that's going on because they might have their vitality a little bit more aligned, but they're totally missing the mirror. And on top of that, they're engaging the mirror with this very defensive, constrictive relationship. And as a result of that, it's almost like if you anticipate being hit by something or someone, that then counteracts the vitality that you just created. So here you are, you've got all this energy and now you're running into a wall in a way. And the thing is that with my clients, one of the things that I help them see is you start to tune into what is it that's going on in the world around you. So I can give you a very simple 4-sequence step that you can go through that's really powerful. This is one of the foundational processes that I go through with clients to help them actually align with their zone of fulfillment. Do you want me to get into that? I want to check in terms of time. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, cool. The first thing to do to align with your vitality is just to tune into what's literally alive in you in that moment. All right, physiologically speaking, what are you sensing? I'm sensing heat. I'm sensing anger. I'm sensing frustration. I'm sitting in this meeting. I'm a different emotion. I'm feeling guilty because my wife just called me as pissed because I told her I was going to be home late. And all these things are bubbling up. And if you can just allow yourself not to judge it, not to analyze it, not to play shrink with it, but just to see it and name it and allow it to be there. The act of doing that brings you into greater alignment with your vitality because it's alive in you. And we're so conditioned to go right to the positive that we miss honoring the truth of what we're experiencing right now. And I'm not saying dwell in it. I just mean just see it, name it, respect it, so you can move on from it. The second thing to do is to start tuning into literally what's going on around you. In this moment could be what's been happening earlier in the day, but you might find yourself in an awful meeting and you're just like, man, I just rushed through traffic because my alarm didn't go off because I was up late last night because my dishwasher just broke, and it's been one thing after another. Now I'm sitting in this meeting across a whole bunch of morons who aren't doing their job. They're making all kinds of excuses, and on you go. And let yourself in a way rant, right? And just, it doesn't have to necessarily be that intense, but it might be. And oftentimes it is. And if it is, that's great because it's energy that's being blocked. And when you do that, you're starting to now tune into what life is mirroring back to you. And then the best question you can ask is going, okay, cool. So I'm noticing these things. How's that showing up in how I'm treating myself or how I'm engaging with the world around me? So where am I maybe slacking on what it is that I'm supposed to be doing? And maybe it has nothing to do with work. Maybe I've been totally hesitating to have some tough conversations with my partner. I haven't been treating him or her or them right. And so I've been, in a way, incompetent, like my colleagues that I'm judging as incompetent right now in terms of my duties and the way I want to be in a relationship. You don't have to cycle what comes up for you in that moment. If you allow the energy to flow, I've done this with countless people and they're always shocked to see it. It's like it just comes up if they allow the energy to flow where it needs to flow. And the moment you can name whatever it is that's being reflected back to you, you can ask yourself a very simple question. Is this serving me right now? Is it serving me right now to feel like I'm carrying this heavy burden or whatever else it might be? And it might be something that's being mirrored back in your weight or, like I said, your thoughts towards yourself or whatever else. And in that moment, oftentimes the answer is a clear no. And once that happens, then you get to ask a very empowering question, which is, if this wasn't here, if I could just take this and I literally have my clients blow it out as if it's like a dandelion thing or do some kind of visual or see a sledgehammer and slam it, whatever it is that feels inspiring to you. So now that's gone. If that's not there, and if you could do anything you could possibly, like anything in the world that you'd feel inspired to do in this moment, not to get through this meeting a little bit more effectively, but anything in the world, what would it be? And I hear answers all the time. I'd be flying a plane over Bora. A lot of times it has to do with some kind of travel. I'd be making love to the most amazing woman in my, whatever it is, right? And you go, okay, cool, great. Let's use the example of flying to Bora. Oftentimes, whatever shows up as a signal from our heart is something that's symbolic of a state of being. And so I ask people, really visualize yourself there. See yourself holding the whatever, not the steering wheel, but whatever they use, I was going to say joystick. It's not a game, a simulation, but whatever the heck they use when they're flying a plane, right? The wheel, and look out the window and see, and really immerse yourself in it. Use the power of your imagination to put yourself there. Feel it, sense it, and so forth. And they're in it and they're there. And I go, okay, cool. What is it that you're experiencing in that moment? And they'll say something like adventure. I'm experiencing freedom. I'm experiencing flow. Whatever it is, it's usually some kind of verb with an energy around it that's unique. That's what your heart, that's what your wisdom, that's what everything, even dare I say life and all the things happening around you wants you to bring into this moment. And that's the game changer, because now the question is, okay, how do I bring that sense of freedom into this toxic meeting that I'm in right now? How do I bring that sense of magic and awe or that mystery or whatever else it is that you're connecting to and that you find appealing in this moment into this situation? And if you allow yourself to be creative, man, does it change things. It changes the whole experience around how you engage that. And once you shift how you engage it, now the ripple effects of that influence everybody else. Because you have more energy, because you literally feel like you've had this burden removed from you in that moment, you're now able to see and sense and tune into data points and other things you would have otherwise missed. You're going to be much more responsive instead of reactive. And ultimately, it's not just about shifting your energy so you are those things. You're doing it in a way that aligns with something that is above my pay grade to explain why it is, but it's unique to you in that moment. And that's what makes it incredibly fulfilling. And when all those elements are aligned, man, people's lives change dramatically without having to drastically shift and wait till all these pieces fall into place. And I could give you examples of people in positions. I recently was working with an executive in the cryptocurrency space. He's insanely wealthy, had major health issues, relationship issues with his family. All these things were going on in probably the most volatile industry that there is. And it's the type of thing where his role as head of the entire operations, a billion-dollar company, was something where it was like the demands were just insane. And he was actually thinking about, maybe I should just leave it. I should just walk away from this. I was like, okay, cool. What would you do if you walked away? He said, I think I'm going to open up an animal sanctuary. I was like, that's like the strange, like, why are you going from here to here? And he goes, because exactly. My life is in such disarray now. Maybe this will help me rekindle my relationship with my family, help me get my health back in place and so forth. I said, do you even like that? He's, I don't know anything about it, but I said, do you like aspects of your current job, your current role, your current work situation? He said, I do, but it's killing me. So I said, what if there's an option C? What if there's a way for you to engage it through your own zone of fulfillment? And suddenly he looked at me like, is that even possible? I said, let's see. And in just 4 weeks of working on some of these core, just foundational principles, he used to have chest pain after closing his laptop after every workday, had hair loss. He had to take sleeping medication to fall asleep. Like I said, strained relationships with his family. All of those things drastically changed. The one thing that he was tapering off the sleep medication, but everything else literally vanished without even trying to focus on it directly, all because he was in alignment. And he's thriving now. Didn't change his boss, didn't change the volatility of the cryptocurrency space, didn't change the demands on him. He just changed how he's going through every part of his schedule in a way that's incredibly aligning for him. And when you do those things, like I said, maximum impact, maximum fulfillment.
When the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yep.
For entrepreneurs who are listening to this, they have been reading these self-help books and they have this couple of tools that are at their hand. When they're now listening to your pod and they're thinking, wow, there are other tools available, there is a fear. What if I just drop my hammer and I pick up a new tool, but I can't use it anymore and I lose my performance? How can leaders recognize first when they're stuck in these contradictions? And then how would you advise them to proceed so that they could not compromise their performance?
I would frame the question a little different. I would ask and say, are you performing as well as you think? Or are you just using creative accounting? I believe that what we have normalized as far as performance is a fraction of what we're capable of doing. And when you understand, like that executive I was just talking to you about, who literally, without trying to, he didn't take any medication or anything else, but literally his physical body responded to the point that his wife literally said to him one morning, "You're glowing," because his energy was so different. To maintain that degree that most of us consider our optimal performance is nothing close to optimal. It really isn't. It's just everybody else is doing the same thing. And therefore we're like, okay, cool. That's great. So the first thing I throw out to people is I go, are you tired of just creatively accounting or applying creative accounting to define that you're successful in whatever area that you're measuring as successful? Because if other parts of your life are really in the red, think about it as your business. Would you say the overall health of your company is great if one department's doing exceptionally well and all the other departments are freaking like flatlining? Or maybe that's too extreme, but are really bleeding out, are really struggling? You wouldn't. You'd say there are major problems that we need to address here. And would you sit there and say, okay, cool, I'm not going to do any, I'm just going to continue doing what I've been doing on and on again, just because of the fact I can't afford to risk this one department decreasing in its productivity or value? Or would you say, we need to make some changes here? The thing that I tell people is, and in a way, I think that's why people resonate with the work that I do, is I say, you don't need to make a major investment. You don't need to take weeks and months. It shouldn't. And if you can't get value out of it in one session, in 1 hour, then it's not aligning. And that sounds too good to be true because we're so accustomed to misalignment. We're so accustomed to this Ponzi scheme when it comes to self-help, productivity, and so forth. I take from here to use it over here. And it doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be that way. And it's not actually working. I'm not trying to dodge your question. I'm phrasing it differently because I tell all my clients the metrics and the way in which you measure should be questioned first and foremost. And if you want to maintain that same level and hope to just incrementally improve this other area, just 10% or 3% or whatever, great, all the more power to you. I'm not about that because at the end of the day, it's exhausting and in and of itself, not aligning and very unfulfilling to try to keep playing into that Ponzi scheme. It really is. And so the opportunity is to say, okay, what would it be like to dare to challenge these conventions and look at the statistics that are daring us to look at them? I tell people, if truly the answer was work-life balance, eking out another 10% more performance than you're already doing, finding some meaning and just being grateful, and I'm not negating any of those individually, I'm talking about the way in which we go about them, then why is the professional world dealing with burnout rates, job satisfaction rates, and all kinds of other issues when we're talking about well-being, mental health, like all these things more so than we've ever done in our entire lives at any time in history? The statistics are sobering when it comes to these things. And I've talked to lots of HR leaders who are at a point where they're just like, I don't understand why my efforts aren't working here.
I love the idea of challenging the conventions. And I also agree that most people have so much in their tank that they haven't used up, that what they think is optimal performance isn't. But it's one of those questions, right? Someone can work with you and realize that they haven't achieved optimal performance. You can help them. But then champions, peak performers, we're eccentric. We always think there is more left in us. Tiger Woods is still playing years after his glory days because he still thinks there is more in us. So that question, would anybody ever say no to that initial question that do you think you're performing at your best? Or do you, like, everybody will say yes to that. So how do you get that?
What I'm trying to say is not, does the way that you're measuring success and defining success in your life as a whole, does that feel solid to you? If you built a house with, what do you call them? Not studs, the main supports, the main structures. And if you took the areas of your life and said, okay, cool, I've got my work, or I've got my side hustle, I've got my health, I've got this. How would your house look? And most people's house would look like really wobbly. And to me, I'm asking, is trying to just move a little bit of cement from here to here, is that something that feels in your gut? Does that feel like it's been working? Or is that itself exhausting and demoralizing. I agree with you 1,000%. There's way more, and it's never enough. And that's actually an aspect of our medicine. Our medicine is something that's trying to constantly help us evolve. And when I say evolve, you can think about that poetically and philosophically. You can also think of it just physically, right? Here we were at 6, 9, 12 months, depending on how you were as a baby. And you spent your whole life up until that point learning to crawl. You became a master crawler. And then all of a sudden you had this impulse in you that said, you know what, even though your body, most people would say, was pretty good at crawling, some signal in you said, you know what, it's time for me to throw all that away and I need more. I want to get up on 2 feet and walk. Now, that doesn't seem like a big deal because everybody does it. But if you actually look at the patterns of taking at the time, half your life's work and how you've trained your body and everything else, and suddenly said, I'm going to throw all that away and do something completely different, you'd say that's absolutely crazy. Our whole lives are like that. And our medicine itself is constantly moving us to evolve. And that's why we love the hero's journey, the movies where the heroes have to go out into the world and come back more than they were. But there's a big difference between I'm going to go out there and try to do that and get to some point a year, 2 years from now, and every day along the way is going to be this thing where it's unfulfilling and I'm creating a tornado-like path of destruction in terms of other areas of my life. That's the thing that I'm challenging your listeners to consider and say, what if it doesn't have to be that way? And what if you truly dared to evaluate your overall life style and all the different areas of your life like you would your business? Would you say that you're actually performing? I believe most people, if they're being honest, will say no. And I think that's the thing that's humbling for people. And oftentimes that's when people pick up the phone and call me, they go, I try these different things and I'm just sick of this ongoing battle, if you will, where I chase this next thing. Okay, I achieve that. But at a certain point, achieving something at the expense of other things gets really old. And my question to you and your listeners is that underlying strategy is what most people rely on to be a peak performer. I don't think that's peak performance. I really don't. And the thing is, we don't have an alternative as far as what's mainstream. And as a result of that, it's almost impossible for us to comprehend what that could look like till you experience it. Can I give you an analogy of something to really help make this point sink home for your listeners?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen one of those 3D poster books that were popular in the 1990s? I think it was called Magic Eye, was like the main one that it just took the world by storm, right? And I love those books because you look at it, and then for those who don't remember it or don't know it, you look at it and it's just a piece of paper or a book full of pages, and it's got all these dots on it. It's like looks like absolutely nothing when you look at this thing, right? And then they tell you, look at it, hold it up close to your head, do all these things, and hopefully if you look at it the right way, suddenly a 3D image will come out of that noise of dots, if you will. And I was one of those people. I don't know about you, Mark, but I looked at this thing and I would stare at it and I just was like, I felt like the biggest idiot. I'm like, I can't see this. This is dumb. This is a total waste of money. Meanwhile, like my siblings, my friends would come up and be like, without even trying, they'd be like, whoa, it's a sailboat. And I'm like, screw you. I'm like, why can't I see this thing? Here's this interesting experience. We're both looking at the same page. We're both looking at the same piece of paper. My experience is one of total chaos, frustration, constriction, and I'm trying my best to see this thing. Somebody else comes along, they have a magical experience. It was literally called the Magic Eye. And suddenly they see this 3D image. In a way, when you engage your zone of fulfillment, you understand that you shift from seeing and navigating the chaos and all the craziness of your day from a 2D perspective into a 3D perspective. And just as somebody who hasn't yet seen that 3D image is going to go, there's no way there's a sailboat looking at thif dots. Until you actually experience it, it's really hard to wrap your mind around it. But if you truly get the fact, and if you actually just try, or you can go to, at the end, I don't know if you want to share, if you go to, or I'll share with you the link to the website. I'm so passionate about this, and this is not trying to pull a fast one on people or sell them stuff. I've literally created a YouTube channel, and I'm just giving this all away because I want people to understand that there is a very different way. And when that happens, not only will performance increase, but suddenly the ripple effects, the collateral damage that we're so accustomed to will go down. And when that happens, then everybody wins.
What's the name of the channel and the website?
It's Zone of Fulfillment. It couldn't be any simpler. So it's just zoneoffulfillment.com, and on YouTube, it's Zone of Fulfillment. But I love the question. I agree with you, Mark. At the end of the day, I get it. I spent 20 years working in startups in the tech field, and I am entrepreneurial. And that's not a bad, it's that hunger, that drive is a beautiful thing. But just as I'm sorry, I've got 3 different analogies to give, and I'm trying to think of which one to give. When I get passionate, my head goes a lot faster than my mouth can keep up with. When you are in drive mode and you're moving towards something, a goal, and we're all here to do that. We're all here to be incredibly successful and to expand into more. But the thing is, we're meant to do that in relationship to what's going on around us. And at least in the startups I've been in, I've seen a lot of them end up being my clients. The people who, once they finish whatever, they've achieved the thing, and they end up in a really bad spot because all those other consequences eventually add up. And it's something where it really does require a paradigm shift. But it's not something where you have to take this huge leap and take, okay, I'm going to invest for 6 months in order to see some results down the road. It's something where just start by considering going, okay, when have you had enough? When have you had enough with these really awful trade-offs that are really just masquerading, are masking a Ponzi scheme at the core?
Let's talk about trust. You talk a lot about truly trusting life. How can someone start to cultivate that mindset in the face of uncertainty and especially setbacks?
That's a great question. And it's why my book is called Trust Life it's in a question. I don't even know if it's allowed to be a question because everyone's, can you really have a question as a title? But my book is literally called Trust Life with a question mark at the end. And the thing is that question is something where I could give you a simple, short answer. It's not going to do your listeners justice in the sense that there are several critical life paradoxes that people are running into. And ultimately, what you're getting at is the third of these 4 critical life paradoxes. I mentioned the first one, which I call the first step paradox, which is how do you get that when you have no energy to spare? How do you get energy where you're not furthering that Ponzi scheme? And it actually starts by recognizing, and each of these paradoxes translates to what I call a critical breakthrough. These are, if you were to do factor analysis on every bit of wisdom that's out there, I believe that they all boil down to these 4 seemingly simple sounding breakthroughs that you can spend lifetimes mastering. Okay. So the first one is release. Really recognizing and looking at parts of your life and saying, okay, I don't know how I'm going to fix things, but I know this in and of itself is not serving me. So how do I let go of that? And the moment you let go of that, just like carrying heavy weight, you suddenly get energy out of nowhere because of the fact that the energy you would have spent carrying that thing is no longer used in that capacity. The second paradox, critical life paradox, is what I call a compass paradox, which is we are told and have been conditioned to step and use our energy wherever we get it from in all these inconsistent ways. Play to win, play to not lose, play for the long-term vision, play for the short-term vision. There's a million different examples I could give. And at the end of the day, what we end up doing is we become one of those. You ever had an investor who gets really trigger happy and they're like, okay, I got to see results, and if not, I'm going to go here and so forth. And that's what we do. And as a result of that, we end up going around a lot of times in circles because we don't have a consistent North Star. And that North Star is actually beginning to shift from just making decisions with this to truly tuning into your whole sense of wisdom, whatever you want to call that, mind, body, spirit, all combined, and trusting the path of what I call expansion, which is in this moment right here, right now, what is truly expansive for me? Not what's something that's going to give me a momentary bit of relief, but is something that is going to allow me to really move in alignment with that aspect of me that when I am in alignment, I feel fulfilled. That's what fulfillment is. It literally is expansion itself. When you begin to do those two things, why I'm saying this is because if you're in a situation where you don't understand and aren't willing to, or just haven't yet been made aware of the fact that you need to start by creating some space and identifying areas that aren't serving you. And if you're ultimately using whatever energy you do have in this kind of knee jerk, okay, I'm going to go in this direction for a bit, and then I'm going to let somebody else tell me I've got to go over here, versus really being able to tune into that inner guidance system that you have in a very reliable way, you're going to end up in a situation where you don't feel like you can trust yourself. And with that in mind and carrying all these burdens, now you have to do all that in a world in which there's just endless amounts of suffering all around us. I think it was the Buddha who said life is suffering, right? And so often we turn on the news and it's like you just see so many things that just makes you want to crawl into a hole, or it makes you want to go berserk and try to help everybody. And there's just not enough of you to help. And then on top of that, how many times have you tried to help a situation and actually unexpectedly had some unintended consequences that caused more harm than good? How many political measures or government measures had a really good intention, but because of how they were implemented, man, did it cause all kinds of ripple effects, right? Governments across the world are full of that. And so what you're really asking, in my opinion, is how do you navigate, first of all, uncertainty, but uncertainty implies a threat in the way you're asking it. And it implies the threat and risk of suffering. And suffering is the third paradox, the suffering paradox, because our relationship to suffering needs a lot of work. Let's just put it that way. Most of us have, at least from my research and years of talking to people, most people want to eradicate suffering. And on one level, I get that. On another level, I come back to what has made you who you are? Has it been the moments where life's easy? Or has it been the moments where it's been really tough? When are you, I love, I'm sorry, it just popped in my head. I love Game of Thrones. I don't know if you saw Game of Thrones, right? But here you have all these different groups of people who hate each other, but then you have, I'm drawing a blank now, the winter, when the final season, all the people who are basically fighting who are coming to kill and ravage
The White
everybody.
Walkers.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Totally drew a blank here. They're all coming, and guess what happens now? All these enemies suddenly come together and unite, and they see, wait a second, you're actually a decent person. They fight together. They end up winning, right? And so we have this weird thing where suffering actually creates this context for us to be able to grow and for us to better connect with ourselves and with other people. And this is where we're getting to now. Remember how we said earlier, we started with the sound bites don't do it justice, because you could easily take what I just said and say, David is just saying suffering, everyone should suffer. I'm not saying that. At the same time, I said, I can't know whether or not your suffering is helping you align or not. If I didn't go through the hell I went through, I'd still be stuck in the Ponzi scheme approach. Thank the hell God that I'm not because of that. And that doesn't mean you go around and get to decide. I can't answer that. But what I do know is you don't have to answer that if you can truly begin to tune into that inner guidance system and that expansive capability, or that ability to orient to what truly is expansive for us and in right relationship to what life is mirroring around us. So you're starting to see that there's these elements overlap in a really interesting way, which is why I wrote a whole book on it, because it's not a quick soundbite answer going, okay, cool, just suck it up and deal with suffering. There's more to it than that. But the short answer I'll say is this, if I have to sum it up to give your users or your listeners something to walk away from, honor the fact that if you're suffering or the uncertainty that you're afraid of, or that you're overwhelmed by, or that's just grating, just really draining you, ask yourself if you can really tune in. Can you first just honor what's truly alive in you? Can you really just allow yourself to admit, I'm scared, I'm frustrated, I can't believe I'm like this at this age, whatever it is, allow yourself to do that. Then allow yourself to connect to your heart or go someplace where you're in a different context. I often recommend going into nature. If you like nature, do that, because there's nothing that brings you back to that expansive state and helps you connect to your heart and the wisdom within than going into nature. And when you're in nature, dare to go on what I call a wander. You just walk, you just move, you don't have an end in sight, and you go with the intention of, I need some clarity here. How can I best move through whatever it is? And if you can do that, you'll start to see that maybe in that moment, maybe on the walk, maybe a week later, clarity will come to you. And if you're willing to continue to do that and build relationship to that, to yourself, to the mirror that's coming back to you, suddenly now uncertainty isn't your friend, it's your playground, and it's giving you feedback constantly. So if there wasn't uncertainty, you wouldn't have gotten into the entrepreneurial space or whatever else there was. If you knew exactly what the outcome was going to be, you wouldn't be an Eagles fan. I am, unfortunately. Actually, this year has been pretty good. We'll see if they actually continue to play, but there's hope. As a Philadelphia fan, there's always hope that the Eagles will win the Super Bowl, but it's not always the case. You can get your heart broken many times. Anyway, but you can start to see that, to say, how do I trust? Without understanding these other dynamics, in essence, you're saying there's, again, I like to use analogies. Imagine if I told you you were a prison guard for 30 years and every single day there's this one inmate, and this inmate would look at you and everyone was saying, that inmate is just bad news, is scary, is evil, is out to get you. And think of every time you see this inmate just looking at you and just yelling and trying to get your attention. Well, you think of this as a threat. And then one day out of the blue, somebody says, hey, you know what? That person was innocent, actually. Do you really think that like that, you're going to magically begin to trust that inmate? Even though that inmate, let's call it life now, was actually just trying to get your attention and hoping that you would be able to see through all the noise and say, it's not the way it seems. And so when we hear this advice that says, just embrace uncertainty, just trust life and so forth, it's really hard. And that's why I don't want to just tell your listeners, yeah, just trust. It's really hard to trust. What I ask in my book is, how is not trusting life treating you? And if that's not treating you very well, then dare to ask what it might be like, what's going on and what's contributing to that. And that's, again, why I wrote this book, so that it can help people along that process, because it's a tough question to ask.
You gave a lot of amazing advice on an individual level. What strategies do you recommend for creating a culture of fulfillment in a demanding work environment like tech?
Yeah, I get it. Since life is mirroring what's in us, it starts at the individual level. However, your team, or not your team, but all teams have a zone of fulfillment combined. The different medicines that everybody brings works together. Now, again, I'm going to use the example of because I love the Avengers, right? And growing up, my daughter and I, we really love the Avengers. And so she's a big Captain America fan. I'm a Doctor Strange fan. I just love portals and just all that stuff. And she's very much into, she's like this, I always said she's going to play football wearing a tutu. She's just got this sweetheart sense to her, but man, she will just knock you on your back. But anyway, so here are these two characters. They represent the same values of leadership, courage, and justice and so forth. But the essence of how they do so is unique. And I probably should use actually to align with the movies, think Captain America and Iron Man. They made a whole movie called Civil War about them clashing with each other, right? Their medicines and their lack of understanding of that in a way, and ultimately what allowed them to come together was them aligning and utilizing both in more congruence, made all the difference. And so it starts at the individual level, but once those foundational pieces are there or in tandem, you can help the team begin to understand, okay, wait a second, because even as a group, if there's this huge crisis going on, that's reflecting something that's incredibly valuable for you and your team to understand about how you guys, or how you people, I should say, not you guys, you as a team can better align. And it's not just about putting out the fire. It's about understanding that it's helping the team identify something to release so that they can move forward in greater alignment and greater harmony. It isn't just an individual thing, but it really does come down to these concepts that are at the core impact at the individual level, at the team level, and ultimately at the organizational level.
Your work is a congruence of ancient wisdom and logic. How do you balance the empirical rigor of this neuroscience-based reasonings that you have, that you have drawn conclusion from, with the abstract nature of the ancient wisdom that you put in your work?
For me, what really helped was actually I just crossed paths with a particular lineage of indigenous people in Peru who had this 5,000-year-old framework that corresponds to the 4 root forces of the universe, the 4 evolutionary leaps in our brain, and corresponds to a lot more than just that, I'll say. And those 4 levels, if you will, allow you to engage this moment from 4 different perspectives that corresponds to, in essence, what the zone of fulfillment is all about. It really is about helping you shift and honor each of these different perspectives. And the 4 levels are really simple. There's the literal physical level. We're made of bones, cells, right? There's things, I raise my hand like this. You can measure it and say it's his right hand and it's this far apart. Then there's what's called the mental emotional level. We're familiar with that. We all have thoughts and feelings. And depending on our history, I go like this. You might have grown up in an abusive family and that looks like I'm about to strike at you. Somebody else sees it and they go, oh, he's just waving. Or if it's Zoom, it thinks I'm just waving my hand, right? Most of the modern world is just focused on those 2 levels. Slowly, the coming of quantum physics, there's a 4th level that's been explored, which is the electromagnetic, pure energetic sort of levels. And I don't mean that in a fluffy way. Literally equals MC squared. There's energy. You can walk by somebody and depending on their mood or what, you can just feel it. The 3rd level is what is often missing from modern Western perspectives. And this is often called the mythic level, or you can think of it as the soul level. And when I say soul, again, I am not about fluff. I am as like practical and pragmatic as you can get. But if I were to ask you, are you just the cells and bones in your body? You'd likely say no. I'd say, okay, cool. Are you just the thoughts and emotions? You'd say no. Is there more to you than that? You'd say, yeah. I'd say, what is it? I can't put my finger on it, but there's something more that's me, right? That's getting to that medicine aspect that I was talking about that we can all feel. But that level is not really engaged that much because of how we often go about our day, which is in a very literal, objective way. And we've lost sight of some of these things that older cultures ancient cultures used to incorporate more of. And they complement really well because of the fact that each of those levels corresponds to different aspects of our brain. We have our reptilian brain, we have our mammalian brain, we have our neocortex, and we have our frontal lobes. The neocortex corresponds to the mythic level, according to this framework, okay? I say framework, it's a wisdom, but it's easiest describes a framework. What's really fascinating is if you think about it, all the self-help stuff, all the positive psychology, all the performance stuff, you look at any athlete, what separates the top 20 athletes, the Michael Jordans, from the Gary Paytons, right? I'm dating myself, where it's like really good, but there's Michael Jordan over here, right? At that level, it's not skill, it's thoughts and emotions in a way. I'm going to say emotions, right? It's mindset. What influences your mindset is the story that you hold and your imagination, your ability to truly see something and believe it. Nobody was like Michael Jordan in terms of believing no one's going to stop me, and no one did, right? And so what most of us try to do is we are looking at a literal physical world through a very conditioned lens that's saying, I need to do X amount of gratitude practice a day and breathing exercises and do all these mechanical things to try to shift my emotions and thoughts, which is going from, when I say bottom up, I don't mean it necessarily as good or bad, but in essence, I'm using these literal physical things to try to change my thoughts and emotions. But the same overarching story is I can't trust life, I don't trust myself, and life's out to get me. If you go to a place like when you go and I've been to a Tony Robbins workshop, one of the things he does incredibly well is he helps people access that mythic level. And he does it by helping people step into, in an energized state, a different perspective, a different archetypal lens. If I were to tell you, hey, you're struggling with a problem, great. I want you to, who's somebody you absolutely admire? Who's a hero you love? Great. I want you to embody that hero. How would that hero go about solving that problem? Suddenly, all of a sudden, a new idea comes in, right? At the end of the day, when we sit there, why I'm sharing all this is the things that these cultures that seem so out there and off aren't really out there and aren't that off. They just didn't have a double-blind placebo test to sit there and evaluate it. They had real life, real experience and hundreds and thousands of years to actually see it and evolve it in a way. And so all these pieces fit incredibly well, just as we have a left brain and a right brain that fits incredibly well. And so to me, one of my passions is I've always been a bridge. I've always just seen the world in that way. And I believe that science and ancient wisdom, man, take you from that either or. I'm either using my left brain or my right brain, which I call 2D, that 2D perspective. It's either this or it's that, to something that becomes 3D when you combine both. And that's why it's taken me a long time to synthesize and pull all this together. And why I'm so excited about this book to say, okay, here's a way that it's written for somebody like me and who I was, which is very much a left-brained, very much, I grew up in a family of scientists and doctors. So I think that way, and I'm very skeptical. And if there was somebody who didn't trust life, it sure as heck was me, especially given all I'd been through. So to me, science and ancient wisdom perfectly complement one another if we're willing to move away from the soundbite stuff that we have on both sides and really get to the core of it and actually begin to apply it in our own lives and evaluate it for ourselves.
If you could go back to the lowest point of your journey,
Yeah.
being where you are today, knowing what now, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Oh man, I think I probably would have told myself, because I speak about this in my book very openly. There was one night in December of 2015 where you could call it rock bottom, but it's the point where I just threw in the towel. As far as going, I don't see another example out there of any other solution after spending literally over a year doing like couples therapy, reading books, trying to get my physical health in shape, deal with my OC, like all these things I had been doing. And I was just like, man, the harder I'm trying here, the worse things are getting. And you're talking to a guy who's got a resume that most people would be really pleased to have. And I'm like, so again, like my clients, I don't get why this isn't working. And I just got to a point where me being a pattern guy, an expert in user experience, was going, the user experience of this doesn't add up. The steps I'm taking, the advice that's out there, it's like a puzzle that's just, everyone's saying it should just work and it's not. And I literally came into the bedroom. It was well after into the night. It was dark. My wife was sleeping. My daughter, who was 1.5 at the time, she was in bed with my wife. And all I knew growing up was I care most about my family and I'm here to protect and provide them for them. And here I am at this really incredibly low point, probably an awful husband and father to be around because I can't figure it out and I'm scared. And all I could do was, even though they were asleep, I'll never forget, I just stood at the base of the bed and I just whispered out loud to them. I just said, I'm sorry. I'm going to fail you. I got nothing left. I do not see a way out. The one thing I know is continuing on this path isn't going to do any more good, but I have no inkling of what an alternative is. And I'm sorry, it's not going to be enough. And I'll never forget, like, that. For me to admit defeat like that was like, that took a lot. And so tears were streaming down my eyes. And in that moment, I sat down in a chair, or one of those rocking chair things that we had in the bedroom. And I'm just sitting there. And all I remember is the silence was so loud. It was so loud in a way that it was hard to put words to. And then I hear my heart and it's beating and it's beating. And it's not like adrenaline. It's just loud. It's finally, you're fucking listening. I don't know if it's fucking, but anyway. And it's, are you ready? And I'm like, how the hell am I going to trust you? That's what's going through my head. I'm like, You literally, for the last year, my body, at least I had been conditioned by that point after so many failed diets and struggling with my weight and so many problems. I was like, all you're going to do is fuck things up even more. That's all you've done. Why the hell should I trust you now? But it was like a different voice coming through. And I also had this thought. I was like, wait a second. If there ever was a time where my body was going to take advantage of me and could have done so, it was that moment, because that was my absolute lowest. But it wasn't. It was like right there with me saying, are you ready to do the work? And I just sat there and I was like awed by this and scared and all, because I was like, what the hell is happening kind of thing. And then, as I mentioned, when we allow that space to happen, something really freaking cool that's you can't put words to happens, which is information comes in a way. And what came through was a flash of a pattern I had never, ever considered before. It was a flash of memory of when I was much younger in elementary school, and I was playing football with buddies, and we were playing tackle football. And I was an idiot and took somebody who was much heavier and much older than me and pulled them down in a way where my arm bent at a 90-degree angle and they landed on it. And so I fractured both bones. And I, for whatever reason, thought of that. And in that moment, what came to my mind was, in healing, in the 6 weeks that I was in a cast, my body didn't say to my leg, you're on your own, because we got to take care of your arm. And I remember going, wait a second, does it have to be this either or? Does it have to be this Ponzi scheme? I had no idea at the time. It was basically saying, does it have to just be this 2D thinking? That was going to come way later. But all I knew was this feeling of, might this be a way? And what I would have told myself then was, trust that voice. It's going to lead you on this, the most amazing but terrifying ride, but trust that voice more than you're going to do. Because I can't tell you how many times on my journey, I literally tried to turn around. With my book, there were times where this felt so much bigger than me to try to do this that I literally deleted all the files and literally destroyed all the paper copies. And then a month later, the thing that I needed to move forward came to me in a way that I was like, holy crap, I can do this. And this does make sense. And it would allow me to move forward. And I'm like, but what am I going to do? And then I happened to remember that I sent somebody a copy of the book. I forgot to delete that email. And it just so happened it wasn't just the PDF. It was all the original work files. So I would have told myself that voice is your truth in a way. And that sounds cheesy, but it's really what it is. But you got to learn to trust it. And that takes time. And what I wanted was a solution that was going to be like, okay, good, you're all good. I did trust it, sometimes involuntarily, but I learned to trust it fully over a wild journey. And so I would have told myself, yeah, just allow yourself to go where it goes and know it's going to take some time, but you have to build it. No one can just intellectually help you trust that. You have to build that trust. And that takes life experience to do.
We all have demons in our heads, demons that tell us we're not good enough, demons that tell us that nothing will be good enough. And we're always pushing ourselves to be the best version of ourselves. In such a state, one picks up the self-help book in a bookstore. I have read every self-help book that is out there because I'm constantly pushing myself. And after a while, it's the same thing over and over again. You, David, through your book, your understanding of things, through how you have struggled, it has given you wisdom that books just don't. Having figured that answer out, you didn't stop at just having bettered your life. You took the keyboard and decided to then transcribe that and share it with the world. It just shows the type of person you are. So it's an honor and a privilege to have you had on the show, to get a peek into the mind of someone who's not only trying to find fulfillment and better one's own life, but also sharing that gift and knowledge with everybody else so that we could collectively rise as a society. To prepare for the release of this book, you have a TEDx talk coming in Vienna. Tell us what else is going on. Any last words for audience members?
Oh man, so what's going on? Yeah, the book's coming out early next year. It'll all be, the information will be shared on zonafulfillment.com. I literally just did the TEDx talk on Sunday. It was an amazing experience. The impact, the audience, everybody just responded in an amazing way. And the thing that I'm noticing is there's a thirst and a hunger for something that just helps explain this thing that we can just feel. It's the solutions aren't there, but it's not that the solutions themselves aren't. It's how we're engaging them. It's how we're using these pieces of the puzzle. And I guess what I would say to your listeners is dare to really look in the mirror. I'm sure you've got demons and voices and stuff, but allow that to see that and so forth and go, okay, cool, it's just that. But really look yourself in the mirror and just ask yourself, does it feel right? Does this overarching Ponzi scheme, either or thing where you run from this to this, and I'm just going to spend most of my day in get through it mode and get through it mode and get through it mode. Do you really think that's all there is to this? We have literally put a man on the moon. We have literally created world-changing technology. We have doubled human life expectancy. when I interviewed people and asked them these questions and said, okay, how do you know when to follow one truth versus the other? You know what most people said to me? The most common response I got from people who you'd look at and go, you've solved major issues and accomplished all kinds of things. So I interviewed people from all walks of life. The most common response I got to that question was, followed by, if you figure that one out, let me know. And I challenge everybody I talk to really just go literally understand we put somebody on the moon. We have changed the world in so many ways. And I even said this in my TEDx talk. I said, but you mean to tell me that when it comes to what matters most in your life, having a fulfilling life, not just accomplishing something down the road, but feeling full of life and vitality and deep connection, that you're really okay leaving that most important thing to, if you're okay leaving it to, then continue on the path that you've been on. And I don't say that critical of the path that you're on, but once you begin to see that map and that strategy or the strategies aren't working together, it's up to you to decide if you're willing and courageous enough to do something about it. And I get all the reservations. I get all the fears because I've been in them. That's why I didn't trust this voice inside me for the longest time. That's why I decided to write a book about it, because I'm like, there's a process you have to go through. Sequence is important. And I always joke with people. I say, if you don't think sequence is important, go to the bathroom and change up the sequence of how you do things. In terms of when you wash your hands, when you literally close the door, when you take your pants down and pull them out and so forth, right? And I say that somewhat facetiously and jokingly, but it's true. And so these pieces do fit together, and they fit together in a really incredible way. But you have to honestly ask yourself and get to the point where you say, I don't necessarily know what the solution is, but I know I've had enough of this. I didn't have a website to go to. I didn't have YouTube videos to watch. I didn't have a TEDx talk to listen to. That's why I'm passionate about just sharing this with people. But even beyond that, whether it's me or anybody else, just ask yourself, are you really okay with, and if you are, great, all the more power to you. I'm not out to tell you how to live your life. But most people I talk to are not okay with that. They're really actually frustrated by that. And only you get to decide.
Thank you so much for being on the show, David. I hope to talk to you soon again.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.